What's your recommended approach for writing unit tests for an existing code base with already tangled dependencies?
Oh, there's no one approach. I tend to think of code in that situation. I talk about it as being the art of the possible. What is possible? Okay, let's not worry about ideal cases. Let's make that a destination, but that's not where we're at the moment. What is possible? If we already have a culture of integration tests, then my recommendation would be to continue working within that culture so that I can now then more safely refactor things so that I can then, the next generation, I am able to then introduce unit tests. The benefit of that goes all the way back to build times, but also you're ending up with something that is cleaner. You're ending up with something that is more modular, different use of the word modular, but more fine-grained. That this thing that shouldn't depend on a file, it should depend on data, not where the data comes from. I want to have that structure, but maybe I'm not going to make that change if I feel the code already works. Give me an integration test that demonstrates that, then I will change this code accordingly, refactor it, and now I can also write unit tests and probably move the bulk of the activity that goes on in the integration test into that, and it will also execute faster. Okay, so I still keep something of the integration test, but because we're always hitting secondary storage, it's going to be slower. So in other words, that would be one way. If you're working with integration tests already, work with the things that you've got. You've already got a setup, you've already got a culture with that. Look to make those better. In other cases, break the dependencies. How do we do that in a fashion that is safe if we don't have enough tests? This is what Michael Feathers called lean on the compiler. There are some changes that you can make that if you get them wrong, the compiler will tell you. Okay, these are not changes in logic. If I start refactoring logic and I don't have tests for it, the compiler won't object. But these are tests to do with type system. This is like where we talk about renaming and moving, splitting classes. If I try and call a function on a class and it is not on that class, the compiler's not going to go with it. It's going to tell me in no uncertain terms. So there's a class of refactorings that are about movement of code that if you get them wrong, it's the compiler that will do the checking. You're not actually changing the logic. Okay, so in other words, work along those. That will be different for different languages, but in C++, we have a sufficiently static and checked type system that you can actually find a lot of cases where you can do that. And therefore, you open up a seam and a possibility and say, right, now I can drive a unit test in there and allow myself to do other changes. So that's kind of two approaches. Again, another approach is that you start spoofing things. So I make a slight distinction between mocking and spoofing. A lot of people don't. By spoofing, I mean is like I will substitute headers, okay? And I will say, here for the test, here's the actual header that you're going to be using in production, but I'm going to spoof this at the level. I'm going to make sure that the path is changed for my tests, and I will pick up something that provides mocks or other kinds of test double as appropriate. But I'm going to spoof that so that I haven't actually had to change the design or the dependency structure as it stands. But it can be very creative. Sometimes doing that, but that would be another technique. You can also consider link time spoofing as well. If you've got something that's binary compatible, do that. So there's these different techniques. So as I say, it's about the art of the possible. You have to kind of come to the code base and say, I have all of these possibilities of how I can work within it, and I will see what fits. This one, maybe this technique pushes this far. Another technique pushes another way. You treat it as a kind of more pincer style action. You treat it as a long-term progression. So yeah, I think that's a case of building up a kind of like a kind of vocabulary of techniques to help you.
Okay.